It's the year 121 AD. In a military tent on the freezing Danube frontier, a Roman emperor named Marcus Aurelius writes by candlelight, not for an audience, but for himself. He scribbles fragments of a private journal, reminders to endure pain without complaint, to treat hardship as fuel, to never let suffering become a performance. He had no idea that nearly 2,000 years later, his private notes to himself would describe the public career of a man named David Goggins with frightening precision. We view Goggins as the ultimate embodiment of Stoic philosophy, a modern-day warrior monk who conquered his mind through suffering. But through a Stoic lens, Goggins isn't proof that the philosophy works. He is proof of what happens when it's turned inside out. He has taken a private discipline meant to quiet the ego and converted it into the loudest ego on the internet. The Stoics warned that virtue performed for an audience is no longer virtue. It's vanity wearing virtue's clothes. Goggins didn't just find the loophole in that warning. He built a media empire on it. This is how the most famous Stoic on the internet became the exact cautionary tale ancient philosophy tried to prevent: the dichotomy of control. At the core of Stoic philosophy sits a single, almost mathematical idea: the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of Rome's most influential teachers, opened his Enchiridion with this principle. He wrote that some things are within our power and some are not. Our judgments, our impulses, our desires are ours. Our body, our reputation, our circumstances belong to fortune. The entire goal of Stoic practice was to stop wasting energy on the second category and pour it entirely into the first. When you watch a David Goggins video, what are you actually looking at? You see a man running through mud with a torn quad. You see a man screaming at a camera at 4:30 in the morning. You see a man telling you that your alarm clock, your excuses, your tiredness, none of it matters. To the average viewer, this is the dichotomy of control in action, a man who has mastered his own mind. But to a Stoic, something has already gone wrong the moment the camera turns on. Epictetus never filmed his discipline. He taught that the moment you start performing your self-mastery for an audience, you've handed control of your inner state back to the outside world, to the views, the comments, the algorithm. Goggins built an entire content empire on broadcasting the one thing Stoicism insists should be invisible. The internal becomes external. The private becomes a product. And the audience, watching from their couches, begins to measure their own worth against a performance they were never meant to see in the first place. Amor, Fati, and the commodification of trauma. Stoicism also gave us the idea of amor fati, the love of fate. Nietzsche later popularized the phrase, but its roots run through Marcus Aurelius, who told himself that the obstacle is not in the way. The obstacle is the way. The Stoics believed that suffering, once it happens, should be metabolized, accepted, and used, not dwelled on, not advertised, not relived for spectacle. Goggins built his entire brand on a tool he calls the cookie jar, a mental inventory of past traumas he reaches into for motivation: the abusive father, the childhood stutter, the 297 pounds, the failed first attempts at SEAL training. On the surface, this looks like amor fati, turning pain into fuel. But look closer at what's actually happening commercially. Every time Goggins tells the story of his father's abuse, it isn't a private act of acceptance. It's a piece of content. It's the emotional hook that opens a podcast episode, sells a book, or anchors a keynote speech. The trauma has a release schedule. It has SEO value. It generates the same biological response in viewers: shock, sympathy, inspiration that keeps them subscribed. The Stoics warned against exactly this kind of relationship with one's own past. Seneca wrote letters to Lucilius arguing that dwelling on suffering, returning to it again and again, performing it for others, only deepens the wound and feeds the ego's attachment to being seen as someone who overcame something. What was supposed to be processed and released has instead become a renewable resource, mined from childhood pain and sold to an audience as motivation. The suffering isn't behind him. It's his business model. Memento mori without the memento. Another core Stoic practice is memento mori. Remember that you will die. For Marcus Aurelius, this wasn't morbid. It was clarifying. If your time is finite, then pettiness, ego, and comparison become obviously absurd. The point of remembering death was to produce calm, perspective, and humility. Goggins has taken the urgency of memento mori, the you don't have time to waste energy, and stripped out the part that was supposed to produce calm. What's left is pure urgency without peace. The result is a 24/7 war against rest itself. Goggins openly describes sleeping 4 hours a night, running on a torn-up body, training through injuries that doctors warn could be permanent. In Stoic terms, this isn't wisdom. It's the exact attachment to outcome and image that Stoicism was built to dissolve. A true Stoic, reminded daily of death, would ask, "Why am I destroying the only body I have for a brand?" Goggins has converted memento mori into memento grindo, a philosophy of finite time used not to find peace, but to justify infinite punishment, packaged and sold to millions of people who are now measuring their own ordinary, finite lives against a man whose entire identity depends on never appearing to stop. The reserve army of the motivated. Finally, look at who's actually consuming this. Stoicism was originally a philosophy for the individual, practiced quietly, often by people already holding immense power, an emperor, a senator, a tutor to the elite. It was never designed to be mass distributed as a performance for people experiencing real, structural hardship. Every Goggins video draws a comment section filled with people in genuine crisis, people working 2 jobs, people battling depression, people with no time, no resources, and no Navy-funded healthcare to fall back on if they tear a quad running an ultramarathon. They watch a man who has Olympic-level recovery resources scream, "Stay hard" at 4 a.m., and they internalize a simple, brutal message. If you're tired, it's your fault. If you're struggling, you haven't suffered enough. The Stoics actually had an answer for this kind of inequality of circumstance. Epictetus, born a slave, never told other slaves that their chains were a mindset problem. He distinguished sharply between what circumstances allow and what the mind can do within those circumstances. Goggins' content collapses that distinction entirely. It tells a single mother working a night shift that her exhaustion is the same category of problem as a retired SEAL's optional 100-mile race. The dichotomy of control becomes a tool not for liberation, but for blame. Goggins is not a fraud. By every account, his pain was real, and his transformation was real. But that's exactly the point the Stoics would make. They weren't interested in whether the man was sincere. They were interested in what happens when sincerity gets put on a stage and sold. We aren't watching a man who conquered his mind. We're watching a man who turned the performance of conquering his mind into the product. And the scariest part, every time we watch, comment, and compare ourselves to him, we're the ones supplying the demand that keeps the performance running.